Picture this. It's January 30th, 1943. Inside Berlin's broadcasting house, Hermann Göring, commander of the German Luftwaffe, straightens his medals and clears his throat before the microphones. Today marks 10 years of Nazi rule, and he is here to boast again about Germany's unstoppable power in the skies. Only months earlier, Göring had bragged to Hitler, "No enemy plane will ever fly over the Reich." But within minutes, that promise will be shattered not by steel or armour, but by a bomber made of wood, glue and faith. This is the story of the de Havilland Mosquito, the aircraft that rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and drove Nazi Germany to the brink of obsession. The year is 1940, and Britain is bleeding metal. German fighters rule the skies. RAF bombers are being torn apart faster than factories can replace them. Every scrap of aluminum is sacred. The government orders families to surrender their gates, pots and railings, all melted down to feed the desperate hunger of war production. In the middle of this crisis steps one man, Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, an engineer, a dreamer and a man about to propose something so insane that even his friends think he's lost his mind. He wants to build a bomber out of wood. No armour, no gun turrets, no defensive weapons of any kind. When he presented the idea to the Air Ministry, the officials laughed him out of the room. A wooden aircraft in the age of Messerschmitts and Spitfires? Impossible. Wood was for barnstormers and biplanes relics of the last war, not the new one. But de Havilland refused to give up. Backed by Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, one of the few who recognised the genius behind the madness, he pressed ahead with his own money, his own factory, and an army of craftsmen, not soldiers, but carpenters, cabinet makers and piano builders. They worked with Canadian birch and Ecuadorian balsa, shaping thin layers into elegant curves, gluing them together like halves of a violin. What emerged looked like a toy, a giant model airplane destined to break apart at the first gust of wind. Skeptics predicted it would snap in half mid-air, but de Havilland had one secret no one else understood. Britain didn't need more armour, it needed speed. On November 25, 1940, the prototype rolled out of its hangar and lifted into the cold morning sky. The Mosquito flew light, silent and impossibly fast. When test pilots raced it against the Spitfire MKV, Britain's finest fighter, the impossible happened. The wooden plane left the Spitfire behind. Everything had just changed. Everyone expected the wooden bomber to fail. It was supposed to be slow, fragile, a flying joke that would finally silence its defenders. But when the Mosquito took to the skies against the Spitfire, Britain's fastest and most celebrated fighter, something extraordinary happened. The Mosquito pulled ahead with ease. At every altitude, in every climb and dive, it left the Spitfire behind. Test pilots could hardly believe it. The skeptics fell silent. In that moment, the wooden wonder was born, and it was about to become Germany's worst nightmare. Yet the Mosquito had another secret, one that even Geoffrey de Havilland himself had not foreseen. It would take months of combat missions before anyone realized what was happening. The wooden airframe made the aircraft almost invisible to radar. German Wurzburg radar stations, once deadly accurate at tracking British bombers, suddenly began to fail. Metal aircraft reflected radio waves brilliantly. They appeared on screens like glowing targets. But the Mosquito, built of birch, spruce and balsa, absorbed and scattered those signals. Its radar signature was so small that operators often mistook it for birds or interference. One German radar technician later admitted in his post-war debriefing, "We would pick up a contact, scramble fighters, and then nothing. The blip would vanish. We thought our sets were broken. Only later did we realize these ghosts were wooden aircraft slipping through our defenses." This stealth was not intentional genius, it was a glorious accident. De Havilland had chosen wood simply to conserve metal, to speed up construction, and to create a smooth aerodynamic frame. But that very choice gave the Mosquito a new kind of invisibility that no one else possessed. For the Luftwaffe, it was a nightmare. The Mosquito struck with no warning, too fast to intercept, too quick to catch on radar. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving only the echo of explosions behind. German air defense commanders grew desperate. Their reports read like confessions of helplessness. One tactical memo from late 1942 complained, "Enemy wooden aircraft demonstrate reduced radar detectability. Standard interception procedures prove ineffective. Recommend expansion of visual observation networks." In other words, if radar could not see them, the Germans would have to rely on men with binoculars. It was a hopeless solution from the last war, trying to counter an aircraft from the future. So what made this impossible machine work? The answer lay in its construction. While other aircraft relied on steel frames and riveted aluminum, the Mosquito's body was a masterpiece of carpentry and science. Layers of spruce, plywood, and balsa were bonded with special resin in a sandwich structure that was both light and strong. The surface was perfectly smooth, without a single rivet to create drag. Furniture factories, piano builders, and cabinet shops across Britain turned into aircraft workshops. They did not need heavy machinery or vast foundries, only skill, patience, and glue. The result was stunning. Even under bombardment, production continued. At the height of the war, one new Mosquito left the assembly line every single day. Inside that elegant wooden shell roared two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same type that powered Spitfires and Lancasters. Together they produced more than 3,000 horsepower, propelling the Mosquito to nearly 400 miles per hour in level flight, faster than most German fighters, and fast enough to outrun the deadly Messerschmitt Bf 109. And though it looked delicate, it carried real firepower. Its bomb bay could hold a 4,000-pound cookie blast bomb, capable of flattening entire city blocks. A plane made of plywood had become a predator that no one could stop. The same massive weapon carried by the giant 4-engine Lancasters with their 7-man crews now rested inside a plane made of wood. 2 men in a Mosquito could deliver nearly the same destructive power as a B-17 Flying Fortress, which required 10 men, 13 machine guns, and fighter escorts just to reach its target alive. The difference was staggering. The Mosquito did not need formations or defensive guns. It relied on speed, precision, and nerve. Then came the variants, and this was where the Mosquito transformed from impressive to truly terrifying. The fighter-bomber version carried one of the most lethal weapon combinations of the war. 4 20mm Hispano cannons mounted in its belly, and 4 Browning machine guns positioned above them, all concentrated in the nose. Unlike the wing-mounted guns of other aircraft, which had to be aimed carefully to converge at a specific distance, every weapon on the Mosquito fired straight ahead from a single point. The pilot did not have to calculate. He just had to point and press the trigger. The effect was devastating. The burst rate was almost 1,000 cannon shells per minute, plus 5,000 machine gun rounds. Pilots said it felt like firing a hose of molten metal. One veteran Mosquito pilot later wrote, "You could see the shells walking toward the target like a line of fire." Nothing could survive that kind of impact. Despite this added firepower, the Mosquito only lost about 15 miles per hour of top speed. It still outran almost anything the Germans sent against it. Trains, trucks, ships, airfields, anything caught in its sights was torn to pieces. And when enemy fighters appeared, the Mosquito opened its throttles and simply disappeared. One Luftwaffe pilot admitted in frustration, "Chasing a Mosquito was like a man on foot chasing a deer." The Mosquito entered service in the summer of 1941, first as a photo reconnaissance aircraft. Painted in pale blue, it flew deep over Nazi territory, practically invisible against the sky. It could reach targets no other plane could, snap the photographs, and return before German interceptors could climb high enough to engage. The intelligence it brought back was priceless, guiding bombing raids that crippled German supply lines and weapon factories. But reconnaissance was only the beginning. As Mosquitoes multiplied, they changed the very way Britain fought the air war. Until then, daylight bombing was considered suicidal. The RAF preferred to attack at night, while the Americans, flying in daylight, suffered horrific losses. The Mosquito made daylight strikes possible again. Small squadrons began to fly low, racing over the treetops at impossible altitudes, far beneath radar coverage. They struck bridges, command posts, and supply depots with surgical precision. 2 men in what many officers had once called that strange wooden airplane were inflicting more damage than entire bomber groups of 100 aircraft. In September 1942, 4 Mosquitoes carried out a daring long-range raid against the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, Norway. It would not be their last miracle mission. They skimmed across the North Sea, flying so low their wingtips almost kissed the waves. Ahead stood their target, the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo. In a blur of speed and precision, the Mosquitoes dropped their bombs, tearing through the heart of the building and killing several senior German officials. The message was clear: nowhere in occupied Europe was safe. The Germans managed to shoot down 1 Mosquito, but the others escaped unharmed. That day, the aircraft that had been hidden in secrecy for so long was finally revealed to the world. British newspapers exploded with headlines. The propaganda ministry could not resist. The timber of terror, as journalists called it, was now mocking the Third Reich in broad daylight, and there was nothing Germany could do to stop it. During one mission over France, a squadron of mosquitoes encountered two Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, the dreaded butcher birds that had terrorized Allied pilots for years. The 190 was Germany's pride, fast, deadly, and powered by a roaring BMW radial engine. But when the German pilots dived to engage, the mosquitoes simply opened their throttles and vanished. One Luftwaffe ace, humiliated, radioed back to base. "They are not running away. They are mocking us." He was right. The hunters had become the hunted. Within months, the RAF learned that the mosquito could do almost anything. It became a night fighter equipped with airborne radar, hunting German bombers in the dark. It became an anti-shipping strike craft armed with 8 rockets under its wings, each powerful enough to cripple a destroyer with a single hit. Some mosquitoes were fitted with massive 57mm Mollins cannons that could punch through a U-boat's pressure hull as if it were made of cardboard. Others were converted for transport, their bomb bays modified to carry cargo or people. The most famous passenger was physicist Niels Bohr, who escaped Nazi-occupied Denmark hidden inside a mosquito's bomb bay. He passed out mid-flight because his oxygen mask failed, but the pilot noticed him slumped over and dove to a lower altitude, saving his life. The mosquito had become the Swiss Army knife of Allied aviation, a weapon that should not have existed, doing everything it was never meant to do. But nothing compared to what happened on January 30th, 1943. It was the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, and the Nazis planned a grand celebration in Berlin. Radio broadcasts, parades, and speeches were scheduled across the city. At exactly 11 o'clock that morning, Hermann Göring, Reichsmarschall and head of the Luftwaffe, was to deliver a national address from the Berlin Broadcasting House. Göring had once bragged, "If enemy bombers ever reach the Ruhr, my name is not Göring. You can call me Mayor." He was about to regret those words. 3 mosquitoes flew in low over Germany's defences, threading their way through radar nets and flak zones as if they did not exist. At precisely 11 o'clock, just as Göring stepped to the microphone, the air raid siren screamed. The mosquitoes dropped their 500-pound bombs directly on the radio station. The building shook violently. Göring's speech was cancelled, and the Reich's most powerful air marshal was left red-faced and raging. Berlin, the untouchable capital, had just been bombed in broad daylight by wooden planes. The mosquito crews were not done. Later that same afternoon, while Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels prepared to speak, another flight of mosquitoes appeared over the city. Once again, bombs fell, sirens wailed, and the master of Nazi propaganda dove for cover. Only one mosquito was lost. The rest returned home to thunderous applause. The raids humiliated Germany and electrified the Allied world. Headlines screamed, "Wooden Wonder strikes Berlin, Göring eats crow." The psychological impact was enormous. If Berlin could be bombed so easily, no city in the Reich was safe. Yet the mosquito's most daring mission was still ahead. In February 1944, the RAF launched Operation Jericho. In the French town of Amiens, a prison held dozens of resistance fighters who were scheduled for execution within days. A rescue on the ground was impossible. The prison was heavily guarded, and any attempt would end in massacre. There was only one option: bomb the walls open. 18 mosquitoes, escorted by Typhoon fighters, flew through freezing rain and heavy clouds, so low their propellers sliced through treetops. The plan bordered on madness: drop bombs close enough to shatter the walls, but spare the prisoners inside. The lead pilot, Group Captain Charles Pickard, radioed, "Going in now." His mosquito dived through the mist, releasing its bombs with surgical precision. The prison walls erupted. The guard barracks exploded in flames. Amid the chaos, hundreds of prisoners ran for their lives. 79 escaped, including key members of the resistance who would fight on until liberation. 2 mosquitoes were shot down, including Pickard's. He did not survive. But his attack was filmed by onboard cameras, and the footage became legend, a testament to courage, precision, and faith in the impossible. A resistance fighter who escaped that day later wrote, "We heard the engines, then the explosions. The walls fell like stage curtains. We thought God himself had sent those wooden angels." Before we look at how the Germans tried to stop the mosquito, we must first understand the men who flew it, because they were as remarkable as the aircraft itself. Flying a mosquito was unlike flying anything else. There was no crew of 10, no gunners or engineers. Just 2 men, a pilot and a navigator, locked together in a small wooden cockpit, trusting each other completely. Their bond went beyond duty. It was personal, unbreakable. One pilot later said, "We didn't have a crew. We had a partner. You knew his moods, his breathing, when he was scared, when he was calm. You had to. Your life depended on it." One partnership became legendary. Wing Commander Bob Braham and his navigator Bill Gregory, known as Sticks, flew together for years in a Mosquito night fighter. They scored 29 confirmed kills, often in total darkness, guided only by radar and instinct. Gregory would quietly call out directions, left 2 degrees, steady, firing in 5, while Braham flew blind, trusting him completely. Braham later wrote, "Sticks saved my life a dozen times over. He was the best navigator in the RAF, and more than that, he was the brother I chose." 2 men, 1 wooden plane, and a bond strong enough to carry them through the fire. Flight Lieutenant Tony Carlisle and his navigator were legends long before the war was over. They flew so many daring low-level raids over occupied Europe that the Luftwaffe reportedly placed a bounty on their heads. Their signature move became the stuff of legend, racing across the North Sea at wave-top height, invisible to radar, then popping up at the last second to strike coastal targets. German gunners barely had time to react before the Mosquitoes were gone, vanishing into the clouds as suddenly as they had appeared. But not every story ended in triumph. In 1946, tragedy struck close to home. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's own son, was killed while test flying a high-speed Mosquito prototype. The aircraft broke apart in midair during a steep dive, and his father was forced to identify the body. The man who had created the Mosquito lost his son to the very machine that had changed the course of the war. That loss reflected something deeper about the people who flew it. Every Mosquito crew knew the risks. They knew the plane's limits, knew what could happen if the airframe failed, and flew anyway. They trusted the aircraft, trusted their partner, and pushed both to the edge of what was possible. Squadron leader John Wooldridge, who led the daring 1945 raid on Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, embodied that spirit. His Mosquito flew so low during the attack that its propellers threw spray from the harbour into the air. Witnesses swore they could see the pilots' faces through the cockpit glass. Wooldridge's navigator later said, "I looked down and saw people staring up at us from the streets. We were below the rooftops. It was insane. It was glorious." No one captured the Mosquito's soul more completely than Group Captain Percy Pickard, the man who led Operation Jericho. Pickard was already famous, having starred in a wartime propaganda film. He could have stayed safe, training new pilots from behind a desk. Instead, he kept flying combat missions. Before his final flight to Amiens prison, a fellow officer asked him why he kept volunteering for these near-suicidal operations. Pickard smiled and said, "If we don't come back, at least we tried something worth doing. That's more than most people can say." He did not come back. His Mosquito was shot down during the prison raid. But he died knowing that his courage had freed dozens of resistance fighters who would live to see France liberated. The men who flew the Mosquito were not just pilots, they were volunteers for missions that by all logic should have been impossible. In a heavy bomber like a Lancaster or a B-17, danger was shared among a crew of 10. In a Mosquito, it was just 2 men against the entire Reich, bound by an intimacy that made them fearless. One navigator, William Bill Blessing, who flew 72 Mosquito missions, described it perfectly. In a big bomber, you could hide a little. You were part of a crowd. In the Mossy, there was nowhere to hide, not from the enemy, not from fear, not from yourself. You either faced it together or you didn't come home. That makes you break, or it makes you unbreakable. Most of them became unbreakable. By 1944, the Mosquito had become Germany's most maddening opponent. It was not the most destructive aircraft of the war, but it was the most infuriating. A Luftwaffe intelligence report from March 1944 admitted grimly, "The Mosquito can reach any target in the Reich with virtual impunity." Fighter defences, despite all efforts, remain largely ineffective. Germany tried everything. They sent fighters to intercept, but catching a Mosquito required perfect timing. The Mosquito flew faster and higher than most interceptors could manage. One German pilot summed it up bitterly. "By the time we reached their altitude, they were already 10 kilometers away. By the time we turned to chase, they were crossing the channel." Most Mosquito losses came from flak, not fighters. Even then, the aircraft's loss rate stayed astonishingly low, under 1% for the entire war. Compare that to the 8 to 10% losses suffered by heavy bombers, and it becomes clear why the Mosquito earned its legend. Desperate for results, the Germans developed special tactics. They fitted their Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s with nitrous oxide boost systems, laughing gas. The Allies called it to gain short bursts of speed. In theory, it would allow them to catch the Mosquito during reconnaissance runs. In practice, it almost never worked. The systems were unreliable and dangerous. Engines overheated or failed after only a few seconds of use. Next came dedicated night fighter squadrons, tasked solely with hunting Mosquitoes. They waited along known approach routes, hoping to ambush the wooden bombers. Occasionally they succeeded. Ace pilot Heinz Wolfgang Schnorfer claimed several Mosquito kills this way. But for every one shot down, dozens more returned unscathed. By late 1944, Germany finally produced aircraft capable of matching the Mosquito's speed. The Me-163 Comet rocket interceptor and the Me-262 jet fighter. Both were technological marvels, faster by far than the Mosquito. But there were too few of them, and too little fuel to keep them flying. Each Mosquito sortie forced the Luftwaffe to waste its most precious resources just trying to respond. Then came the ultimate humiliation. The Germans tried to copy it. Kurt Tank, the brilliant designer behind the Focke-Wulf 190, was ordered to create Germany's own version of the Mosquito. The result was the Tu-154 Mosquito. Yes, they even borrowed the name. It was a twin-engine wooden fighter bomber built with a special adhesive meant to mimic the British bonding process. At first, it looked promising. Test pilots were impressed by its performance. But then Allied bombers destroyed the factory that produced the critical glue compound. Forced to improvise, German engineers substituted an inferior adhesive. The next prototype disintegrated mid-air during testing, killing the pilot instantly. A Luftwaffe report concluded coldly, "Structural failure due to inadequate bonding. Aircraft unsuitable for operational use." The Germans had tried to copy the miracle of wood, and wood itself refused to obey them. Only a few dozen of Germany's Tu-154s were ever built, and they never became an effective fighting force. The irony was perfect. The Reich had tried to copy the aircraft that everyone said could not possibly work, and their version literally fell apart. By late 1944, even German officers were admitting defeat. One Luftwaffe memo bluntly stated, "No effective countermeasure against the Mosquito has been found. We must accept that certain targets will remain vulnerable to these attacks." It remained true until the final days of the war. So why is the Mosquito not more famous? Why was it not produced in even greater numbers or used more widely? The answer is uncomfortable. The Mosquito was brilliant, but it did not fit the prevailing mindset of the time. RAF Bomber Command was obsessed with heavy four-engine bombers, the Lancasters and Halifaxes that could carry vast bomb loads on 1,000-plane raids. Their strategy was built on overwhelming destruction, not precision strikes. Air Chief Marshal Arthur "Bomber" Harris once said, "The Mosquito is an excellent weapon, but wars are won by weight of bombs, not by brilliant exceptions." There were practical limits as well. Every Mosquito required 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same ones demanded by Spitfires, Lancasters, Mustangs, and Hurricanes. Engine production could not keep up, and planners had to choose carefully where those power plants went. The Mosquito's wooden construction also had weaknesses. In tropical climates like Burma or the Pacific, heat and humidity sometimes caused the glue joints to fail. Airframes warped and maintenance crews fought constantly to keep them airworthy. The Mosquito was a weapon made for Europe, best suited to the skies that gave it birth. It was a precision tool, called upon when something daring had to be done fast, quietly, and with impossible accuracy, and each mission that succeeded silenced the skeptics yet again. Between 1940 and 1950, nearly 8,000 Mosquitoes were built, an impressive number, though far fewer than the 20,000 Spitfires or 7,000 Lancasters that rolled from factories. But numbers alone missed the point. The Mosquito flew more than 28,000 operational sorties and performed every task imaginable. Bomber, fighter, night fighter, photo reconnaissance, pathfinder, anti-shipping, submarine hunter, and courier. No other aircraft in the war matched its versatility. Its loss rate remained the lowest of any Allied bomber, under 1% across all missions. For comparison, RAF heavy bombers averaged losses of more than 4% per raid. Over a 30-mission tour, A heavy bomber crew had about a 40% chance of dying or being captured. Mosquito crews, by contrast, had dramatically better odds of survival. Wing Commander Bob Braham, the RAF's most decorated airman, said after the war, "The Mosquito was the best aircraft I ever flew. Fast, agile, reliable, it saved my life more times than I can count." The names of its heroes live on. Flight Lieutenant Tony Carlisle, who flew so many low-level raids that the Luftwaffe put a bounty on him. Squadron leader John Wooldridge, whose propellers churned up the Copenhagen harbour during his Gestapo headquarters strike. And Group Captain Percy Pickard, the man who led Operation Jericho and died to make it succeed. Each embodied the same spirit. "If we don't come back," Pickard said before that final mission, "at least we tried something worth doing." That spirit defined the Mosquito and everyone who touched it. When the war ended, the Mosquito flew on for a few more years, though its era was clearly closing. Jet engines were the future, and wooden aircraft were relics of a desperate age when Britain had to innovate or perish. The last combat sortie by a Mosquito came during the Malayan emergency of the 1950s, attacking insurgent positions in the jungle. Soon after, most were retired or scrapped, their wooden frames succumbing to time and weather. Today, fewer than 30 survive worldwide, and only a handful are still airworthy. Yet the legend endures. The Mosquito proved something that military planners still struggle to accept, that unconventional ideas, the ones that sound absurd, can change the world. Sometimes speed and precision matter more than armor and firepower. Sometimes two determined people in a wooden aircraft can accomplish what hundreds in steel cannot. Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, who endured years of ridicule for his wooden folly, was vindicated. After the war he said, "They told me it couldn't be done. They said wood was obsolete. They said speed without armor was suicide. They were wrong about everything." Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, the man who believed in him when no one else would, later wrote, "The Mosquito was not merely an aircraft. It was proof that courage and imagination can overcome any obstacle. Britain needed that proof in 1940, and the Mosquito delivered it." Even Germany, in its post-war analyses, gave grudging respect. Hermann Göring, once the proud master of the Luftwaffe, was asked what he feared most. His answer was simple: "The Mosquito. We had nothing to match it." Coming from the man whose grand anniversary speech was interrupted by its bombs, that confession must have stung more deeply than any wound. The story of the de Havilland Mosquito is more than aviation history. It is a reminder that when the world seems lost, it is often the bold, the unconventional, and the underestimated who turn the tide. It is about two visionaries, de Havilland and Freeman, who believed when others laughed. It is about craftsmen who built wings of war out of furniture wood. It is about pilots who flew straight into the heart of Nazi Germany, with nothing but speed, skill, and trust in one another. And above all, it is about a miracle of plywood and glue, a plane that should never have worked, yet struck fear into the Third Reich, crashed Hitler's anniversary celebration, freed prisoners from certain death, and proved that sometimes the surest path to victory is simply being too fast for the enemy to catch. That was the Mosquito, the wooden wonder, the timber terror, the plane that won by refusing to fight on anyone else's terms.